Ooh, hit me once. Bam! Hit me twice. Ooh, ah! Da-da-da-da-da. Oil and grime. Poison sludge. Diesel clouds and noxious muck. Slime beneath me. Ooh, slime up above. Oh, you love my toxic love.
Hello everyone to part 2 of the CM Kozemen Open Question Time Patreon Extravaganza, where basically by using a Patreon-oriented Baroque version of the Super Chat system, I answer questions that I collected over 2 months ago from my followers on patreon.com. If you have more questions, don't worry, we are doing a second round and the link is in the video description and below. So just go there, support me on Patreon for any amount of money you want. Even $1 a day, even $1 a month makes a huge difference. And then you can ask your question and there's no limit to questions. Obviously, like if you ask me 100 questions about my favorite color, I won't answer them all, but yes, you can ask multiple questions and it's all good fun. So go there, go below, support me on patreon.com and also consider listening to this podcast at twice or 1.75 times the speed. Makes me sound like a cooler person. Okay, without much ado, let's go because we have over 40 questions and it takes me like an hour to answer, maybe 10. So yeah, this is going to be a long series. Before starting this round, this next batch though, I'll just need to clarify something. In the last episode, I was asked about what would happen if cats were intelligent. I gave a kind of like a mediocre answer. Then I realized the crux of the matter is at farming. Humans basically have this stratified society with all these like tough divisions of basically inequalities and tough divisions of labor due to two factors. One of them is the age-old evolutionary leftover, that is the monkey troop dominance system basically. It's hardwired into most primates that like this one dude leads a little group and then there's like a hierarchy, unfortunately. And then I realized I completely overlooked the second factor, which is farming. Without farming, it's very difficult to make things like palaces or sophisticated art or sophisticated furniture or chattel slavery. You know what I'm saying? Now, cats being carnivores, they probably would not evolve a farming society at all. So their overall civilization would be extremely different. Maybe they would have things like this famous Göbekli Tepe monuments, which occurred in southeastern Anatolia, just at the cusp of the transition from hunter-gatherers to farming societies. Basically, they were complicated structures, but it looks like the people who built them were not farmers. They were just like really complicated bands of hunter-gatherers. And then these Göbekli Tepe ruins are just really awful. They have these scenes of decapitation and all these animals killed as a kind of bountiful larder, but also probably as a kind of sacrifice to gods. And also like basically their way of telling themselves that, yeah, we can kill stuff and eat them. So maybe a cat civilization could build stuff like that, but also remain at that level without advancing technologically considerably. Or maybe they could stay at that level, but also advance technologically, though I fail to see how. But we're generalizing from a sample size of 1. Or cats could evolve these like pastoral civilizations where they are farming, but the thing they are farming is other animals. Maybe they become just like sheepdogs. So like a civilization of sheep cats that just keeps up pace with their flocks, and they like try to steal sheep from each other, or like that kind of hierarchy. And maybe that would be like a migrant civilization because the animals need pasture land to graze. So they could be like a weird crossover between Mongols and the Göbekli Tepe civilization. I don't know. So just clearing that thing about cats asked to me in the previous episode by Thomas Zimmer. So now let's look at this batch. Okay. Lycan Man asks, what are your favorite books on your shelf? Also, how did you amass such a huge library? Are you reading anything interesting currently? Alright, good question. I have become a prolificate book collector, and to my credit, I always read my books. You know, there are these people who are like, I'm a bibliophile, and they basically buy whatever they see on the, I don't know, like Times book list or whatever, like this like sophisticated but more normie books, you know. The kind of people who would read Sapiens, but maybe not read Thinking Fast and Slow. Or the kind of people who would read Sapiens, but would probably not be aware of the mind in the cave. Look, I just have one rule for book collecting. I just get the books which I know I will read. I don't get books because they look pretty. I don't get books because they're cool or other people are reading it, or I see them in a fucking bestseller list. Although, of course, I also see books in the bestseller list which I like, then I get them. But I also collect a lot of obscure like memoirs. I've got this like a few genres of concentration. Basically, when you start collecting stuff, you have to have a few criteria. Like if you collect things randomly, you become a hoarder. And even though the line is moot, I don't want to become a book hoarder. I want to like cultivate a big library. So what do I read? I read books about basically my part of the world. It's about travel, and especially like travelogues by 19th century British explorers or some Dutch. They're really nice to read about the Mediterranean world. I also collect memoirs from herpetologists, but I also have a special soft spot for memoirs by people who lived in Turkey, and these could be anything from like the memoirs of a Jewish person who lived in like the Asiatic district of Kuzguncuk, to just the memoirs of a banker who lived and worked in the 1950s. You know, I'm pretty omnivorous. So I collect memoirs, travel books. I don't read much fiction, you know. I read science fiction and lots of it. My rule is that if you want to read fiction, you just have to go the whole hog. And what else? Like, I collect field guides if they're relevant. I obviously cannot collect every field guide, but like, there's this very famous book, for example, Snakes of Europe by Geniez, and oh mate, I need to get this. So the full title is The Snakes of Europe, Middle East and North Africa, and it's just a great book. There's also an amazing other book called Reptile Life in the Land of Israel. Like, you know, niche guidebooks about things and places that are relevant to me. I collect them. Also, I collect science fiction art, paleo art books. Like, okay, I got a soft spot for them. And basically, I amassed this library over nearly 25 years now. It started when I was a kid. So my grandfather, rest his soul, when he traveled overseas, he got me dinosaur books and like illustrated nature books. And we're talking about the late 1980s here. So like there was no internet, no Amazon.com. So like your information was limited to the things you saw in a book, literally. So that gave me a good head start. Whenever I traveled overseas, I spent all my money and luggage space on books, basically. I mean, I don't care for clothes. Like most people when they go overseas from a place like Turkey, they buy fucking clothes. I hate clothes with a vengeance. So I just get books instead. A secret trick is to go to second-hand bookshops. You can find almost anything there at like half the price, and like it's almost sinful to like go to a fancy bookshop and pay twice the money for something. I think that's one. And there's that, like, I also have this cool thing in my library where I have this custom stamp. It says started reading on and finished reading on. So I stamp every book with that stamp and I note down the dates I started and finished reading. So it's a nice thing that adds color to my life. Of course, I also don't use a smartphone, so I get plenty of time to finish books on my daily commute, on the subway, or, just when I'm sitting at home. I read real books, and they really add to me. I am not very keen on ebooks, but on occasion I have downloaded ebooks from where and printed them and bound them as real readable books. I don't have this romantic thing, like, for example, I don't prefer first editions or signed editions. Like, if it's text on paper, I read it, but I just cannot read properly from a screen. I just get bored. I don't know. My mind tunes out. It feels impermanent. So because of this, I am bound to paper books, basically. And it's a nice thing. I think anyone can do it. The trick is to another trick is like never to start another book until you finish reading one. Even though that book might be really stupid and crap and boring, but you just have to power through. It's a kind of sense of personal discipline. So are you reading anything interesting currently? Currently, I am reading this book. Let me dig it up. Last weekend, and I'm recording this on the 2nd of May, 2023. And just last weekend, my wife and I took a holiday to Ankara. This is like another city in Turkey, basically. And it's the capital. If it's the capital, it means one thing. There are lots of embassies there, a lot of people who read in English, write in English, a lot of smart people. Like, Istanbul has maybe twice as many people or even 3 times. But I'm sorry, but the overall quality of people taken as a whole compared to Ankara in Istanbul is just crap. But if you go to Ankara and go to those second-hand bookshops, you can make some amazing discoveries. And I did, and lo and behold, now I'm reading Nick Pope's book of UFO lore, basically, Open Skies, Closed Minds. Now, I'm a healthy skeptic when it comes to UFOs, but this Nick Pope guy, he claims he worked in basically the bureaucratic ministry of the British Air Defense Department, and he was responsible for, like, bureaucratically analyzing UFO reports. And he has a few interesting things to say, but other than that, most of the book is kind of inflated, but at least it's not like the other UFO book I read in this last year, Whitley Strieber's Communion, where I was expecting something profound and it turned out to be like this just upper middle class conceit by this guy. Whereas Nick Pope seems like an honest guy, but I think like the UFO reports he's talking about, there's this one amazing incident there. It's called the something forest incident. Oh, let me look it up. Let me look it up. Oh, just bear with me. It's the Reedsum Forest incident, I believe, where outside an airbase they really saw like something strange. And maybe it was an experimental aircraft having trouble. I don't know. But like there's some interesting stuff there. It's certain that some of these UFO reports are about untested, unreleased experimental aircraft. But Nick Pope kind of inflates this. It feels like this book could have been like 100 pages and very interesting. Whereas now it's like close to 300 pages and kind of an okay read, but nothing life-changing. So there, Lichen Man, your question has been answered. Kaching, thank you for your contribution. And it only took me, like 15 minutes? Let me find my marker. Cross this bad boy over. Okay. Jack Sperrin asks, this is a 2-part question. Okay. What advice would you give to someone wishing to experiment with Spec Evo art and things of that nature? Alright, so I answered questions like this on my channel before if you just like go to my videos and watched. But since Jack paid his hard-earned currency for this question, I'll just reiterate. Sometimes we get these ideas for big projects, like you want to design a world or you want to design an entire ecosystem. But sometimes you just have ideas for creatures. And it's also perfectly okay to just draw an individual creature, kind of scratching an itch about a concept you have in your mind. For example, you could, I don't know, like imagine a cat that has specialized to crush turtle shells. Like, what would its skull look like? You know, like tough teeth, heavy teeth, I don't know. But you don't have to create the entire world for that cat to live in. You know, you don't have to create another, like, alternative evolution from the Miocene where, like, there, I don't know, you don't have to do it. You could just create the creature itself. Or, like, even if you're thinking about wild things, like creatures that look like glass, I don't know, you can just create the creatures yourself and just write one paragraph about the world and one paragraph about that creature and how it evolved, and maybe one more paragraph about how it moves and its like secondary interactions. Like if you're writing about this hypothetical turtle-eating cat, for example, turtles hibernate in winter, so these cats hibernate in winter too. So when it's spring, they wake up, and maybe you could like embellish it with little details. Maybe you could say that when they wake up, the cats eat certain spring flowers to make up for the vitamins lost during hibernation. You know, stuff like this. And maybe how they pace riversides looking for turtles. So local people can call them river stalkers or something. Like you gotta imagine how this thing lives and then embellish its world with little details one by one. They could be cultural details. They could be like details about their life, or maybe like even weird things, like what if it makes a really weird sound at night, you know, something like this. Also, like, make up your mind if these animals are gonna live in a world with people in it, or a world without people where you're just the disembodied observer, so to speak. If the world has people in there, there will be a lot of chance interactions between people and these animals, and then you could look into basically human folklore about every sort of animal. And I mean, you would know that people have very creative ways of dealing with animals in their legends and stuff, so you could like add even more details with that. So that's a nice idea for if anyone wants to experiment with Spec Evo and things of that nature. Second question from Jack Sperin. Who within the Spec Evo world do you personally enjoy yourself? I'm a big fan of Callum Diggle and Dougal Dixon. Yes, I also like greatly enjoy Callum Diggle's artwork. He has an amazing series of comics called Humanity Lost, and it's basically about are we the baddies then moment for people, where there's this galaxy of incredibly creative and realistic looking aliens, and among them humanity is the malignant force, and God, I mean, and also, boy, I mean, can he draw? He's like a god level skilled artist. So like, go look it up and go support Callum's work on Patreon too, actually. It's Callum Diggle, that's CALLUMDIGGLE. Go look him up. He's like a god among men. He's got a level of artistic skill I can only hope to match. Also, I'm a big fan of, similar to Callum's work, Simon Roy. He has some amazing post-human works, but I'm not sure if like he's only showed them to me or if he shows them on Patreon, but go support Simon Roy on Patreon too. Also, I'm a big fan of Dylan Badja, who created the Serena project about this world full of canary descendants, but they're all like very, very beautifully rendered, like an artistic genius. And also recently, I will recommend you this thing. Like, so 2 or 3 years ago, I made this project basically exploring this map of the flat earth, and a lot of these flat earth believer people kind of make these strange cut and paste maps of like imaginary continents beyond our own, and basically they just claim that there are continents outside the wall of ice that is Antarctica on the flat earth basically. And so I realistically explored a map like this and like speculated on how life would really develop on an environment like this. And then just last week on Saturday, April the 29th, I received an email from Oha Wewe. The name is spelled OHAWHEWHE, and unbelievable. So Oha and his team of over 10 amazing artists and writers have created this amazing world called Beyond the Ice Wall, where there are multiple continents around and outside of Earth on a giant, endless, flat Earth kind of ecosystem. And each, like, the lore is so complicated, and the way it's presented is amazing too. It's just this one giant PNG map, but it's like 100 megabytes large or something. And it's like one of those medieval maps of the world. But so the different nations of the world colonize different extraterrestrial continents, but there are also native humanoid creatures inhabiting these continents. But there's also the culture of our own world. So you got things like a Turkish colony of humans and Muslim gnomes, and also like a Spanish operated colony of Catholic gnomes and stuff like that. The gnomes aren't gnomes as we know them. They're just a kind of non-human primate, and it's just amazing. So I really, really recommend this. In fact, like, go support Oha Wewe on patreon.com as well. The full name, I'm gonna spell it out, OHAWHEWHE, and the whole project you can just find through Oha's Patreon, or just go to DeviantArt and look for, basically, Beyond the Ice Wall. It's amazing. It's like one of the most dynamic, engrossing universes. Like, I spent 2 whole nights looking at this one PNG file. Unbelievable stuff. So hope this answers, and go support everyone I'm mentioning on Patreon. Please. We all need your support. Alright. How long along are we? Okay, still got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Jack Sperring continues. Can't wait for the publication of All Tomorrows. You really inspired me to follow my artistic dreams. And man, thank you so much. You know, comments like this really make my day. They matter to me a lot, and like, you know, one of the reasons I'm in this whole game is to inspire others, and it's just a great, great feeling. Okay, Pasca Goulian asks, what is your favorite Jack Vance book or series? Are there any books or movies in which the Sword and Planet or science fantasy genre that you recommend? Okay, so Jack Vance is like, I think, the great granddaddy of, like, one of the hidden great granddaddies of all Spec Evo lore. The name is spelled Jack Vance, that's V-A-N-C-E. And boy, I mean, this guy's an amazing writer. I also read his biography, and there's even a book about, basically, there's a dictionary entirely made out of the strange languages and terms that he introduces in his universes. And like, in every book, Jack Vance creates many new cultures, many original social settings. Like, it's one of his specialities. So he was, I think, the first person to come up with the concept of aliens domesticating humans. Like, in his Planet of Adventure series, there are multiple alien races exploiting, let's say, human colony planet. And each alien race has their own breed of kind of turncoat, quisling people. That is like predatory creatures called the Dirdir. And there are, like, under their rule, there are things called Dirdir men. And these are human beings, But these Dirdir are horrible aliens. They're like carnivorous bird, insect, like running reptile creatures. So these Dirdir men file their teeth, and they have these levels of like ascension towards becoming more and more like their masters. It's really scary and like really well done. And like this, I read his Planet of Adventure series, Jack Vance's Planet of Adventure series, when I was younger. And I think, like looking back now, I think it kind of inspired All Tomorrows as well. This is the one book I recommend, but even there are books like The Dragon Masters, and you start reading, and it feels like it's a book about people fighting with dragons. But turns out actually the dragons are domesticated reptilian aliens used by these human beings to fight their own wars. But then the aliens return with domesticated human warriors of their own. So it's a great like medieval set piece battle between like genetically mutated humans. Like their cavalry is like giant brainless people who run around on all fours. So that's amazing. Oh, it's just an amazing book. And salient through all of Jack Vance's books is something I really like and admire. It's this kind of undying spirit of humanity kind of thing. His heroes are always like, they're a bit like action heroes, like this one person single-handedly saves the planet usually. And yeah, even though that's kind of exaggerated, like these values he's espousing, they're I think really noble. Also remember that in his life, Jack Vance worked with his hands. He wasn't like, he did not grow up in luxury. So he had to like earn his living, and I think that's also kind of filtered in to the whole setting. So he's kind of like, he says that the world is full of monsters, but just you can defeat them if you stick true to your convictions, basically. And he does this in a sort of center left wing manner, which is quite different because there are also other authors who like defend a kind of like humanity is sacred kind of point, basically, like Robert Heinlein, but they fall off to the right wing of the spectrum. So in that respect, Jack Vance is also really based, and I cannot recommend his work enough. I say maybe start with the Dragon Masters and then also read the Planet of Adventure. Of course, it doesn't help that there are like 1,000 books there are 1,000 books by Jack Vance. He literally wrote like dozens and dozens of sci-fi operas, and I've only read a few. Also this trilogy with the Aenom, the Faceless Man, and the Brave Freeman, they're also like really, really great books. One of the books is called the Aenom, that's A-N-O-M-E. The other is called the Asutra, or the Brave Freeman. There's 3 books, I don't know. Like go look at the Aenom trilogy, basically. Oh, it's called also the Dürdain trilogy, because Dürdain is the name of the planet. It's very funny. Dürdane in Turkish happens also be like an old grandma's name, but that's just a coincidence, I guess. So I could say the Dürdain trilogy, the Planet of Adventure quadrology, and then the Dragon Masters standalone book. Go read these by Jack Vance. In the Dürdain trilogy, it's amazing because it's less about aliens and more about social evils. Basically, it's set in a planet that's shattered into like dozens of like Switzerland-like small countries, but each country has its own culture and weird ways of living. So our hero lives in this one small canton in which the men are basically incels. They go to a temple, take drugs, and basically see visions of this goddess and come in their dreams. And if they ever like touch a woman, they feel unclean and they need to be banished or something. So in this world of incels, there's also a lot of like roadside taverns and restaurants, and in these taverns and restaurants there's also a lot of women who basically engage in prostitution in order to survive. And when these prostitutes give birth, the temple steals their children, and if they're guys, raises them as these incel temple people. And if they're women, they're left with their mothers to like work in these taverns and like work on OnlyFans basically. It's really like something like so eerily similar to the toxic state of gender relationships in some parts of the world today, don't you think? Also in this Durden trilogy, there's this figure called the Faceless Man, and everyone wears explosive chokers. And if the Faceless Man sees you committing a crime, he can blow you up. The only thing is nobody knows who the Faceless Man is, so the entire world is kept in check with fear, and it's just like really good social and religious critique. And I really like that about Jack Vance, like this kind of based post-1789 human rights and enlightenment ideals without veering off too much into the left or right. I really like his politics. So there, let's see. It's almost been half an hour. We got time for one more question. Let's go. Thomas Strimple asks, if you've seen the new movie 65 starring Adam Driver, how would you rewrite the film? It seems like they missed an opportunity for a survival horror movie featuring aliens and humans stranded on a planet teeming with dinosaurs. It would be fun to hear your mock-up script, like your alternative King Kong films. So yeah, a few years back on this channel, one of my things was to basically watch a movie, critique it, and then at the end of the critique, I would always have this sequence called The God of Hollywood, in which the God of Hollywood comes down to me and says, "Are you C.M. Kozeman?" And I say, "Yes, God. And here's $1 billion for you to make King Kong or 65 in any ways you please." I said, "Yes, God, I'll make that film again for you." And that was just game. That was just my game. And then I would imagine, basically, my version of that film. Now, unfortunately, I haven't seen the new 65 movie with Adam Driver in it, but he seems to be brandishing like these really coolly designed space guns at these really badly designed broken-wristed quadrupedal bullshit space dinosaurs and protecting his space daughter. It kind of reminds me of that other film, that really awful M. Night Shyamalan film with Will Smith and his son in it. But I think even that movie was better than this one. But that movie, I don't even like Earth After Earth or something. Basically, it's just like father and son go off to another planet to fight these Ursas, which are these like evil aliens that feed off fear, basically. Somehow they land on a futuristic and abandoned Earth, and they have this adventure. They confront these like post-human animals, like this eagle that builds a nest, and it's like weird creatures, which weren't that badly designed, I think. Like, it's the closest I think we will come to an Afterman movie. Afterman by Dougal Dixon. And let me just get the laundry while you take a little intermission, then I'll be back with my version of 65. Dip, dip. So yeah, so this 65 film really feels similar to that Shyamalan film with the Ursa in it. Like that's my best takeaway from that film. The alien was called the Ursa, and it was like this garbage bullshit visual effect. And apparently the trick was to control your fear and face the Ursa. So anyways, like the 65 movie, I don't know, like all of these movies suffer from a central fault, I think, by falling into this survival category where the animals, the ecosystem, the world building is reduced to just this kind of like carnival scary ride. It's one monster after the other. And yes, sometimes they're really intricately designed monsters, like in that Ursa film, After Earth. What the hell was it called? I don't remember. But in 65, they're like really badly designed as well. And I'm sorry, I don't know the premise, like if this is like Earth in the past or an alternative Earth with dinosaurs in it. I don't know. But, let's see, let's tackle this. I mean, like, if you want a movie with like dinosaurs in it, there was this TV series once about, I forgot what it was called too, but it was about basically humans going to the past to colonize the time of the dinosaurs. And, oh god, I forgot. But there were all sorts of like real life dinosaurs in there. And then there was also this really badass dinosaur apparently, which didn't fossilize. It looked like a predatory oviraptor. Heck, just bear with me. I'm just going to Google this thing. Just a second. TV series. Dinosaurs. Okay. I think it was Terra Nova, to be honest. Was it that one? Oh, let's see. Yeah, it is Terra Nova. Yeah, Terra Nova. It's this bunch of like mid-20, early 2010s people just hanging about. And they got their community and stuff. There are also dinosaurs around, but they're like a background to the whole story. And I think Terra Nova was more based than the 65 movie. It wasn't entirely about survival, and the characters had more going on in the background. So it could be something like this, where they maybe have to colonize a past world. But later on they realize it's not as it appears. I mean, maybe they take carbon-14 measurements and it turns out the world is just 6 years old. How could that be? Turns out time travel is actually not what they think it is. They don't go to the past, but they go to a kind of generative pocket universe. And turns out all these dinosaurs and shit, they were a bit uncanny to begin with. They kind of formed out of the vacuum collapse, just through the gist of humans observing that pocket dimension. And then it turns out something else is observing that pocket dimension, and it's like changing the world as it goes. Something like this, where our main characters would be like genuine scientists who have like kind of like half depressing, boring lives where they work for years to complete experiments. I don't know, maybe they have sex a little just to spice things up. Like one of them is depressed somehow. But then this thing happens and they go there, like they have this kind of like initial ebullient phase. It's a new world, blah, blah, blah. There are a few dinosaur attacks, but they're like really deadly, but overall they're not a big deal. They kind of like learn to avoid them. But then when it turns out the universe is basically a satanic dimensional lie, then it gets interesting. And from that point on, it could go to like something even as weird and dark as a kind of more intelligent version of Event Horizon. I don't know. That's how I would make 65. I hope you would like to watch it too. Anyways, that's one more question. So, I think that's that for today. Thanks for all your questions, and if you want to ask more questions for round 2, please go to the links below. There will be more videos in this series upcoming, so thank you all for your support, and as always, have a nice day.